Morning. I'll just wait for people to settle in, but good morning, everyone. Nice to see some familiar names and faces. So we are due to start at 10, so thank you for those that have been able to get in at the start. As you can probably imagine, from what we've been doing this week, we do get people that are coming in the first 5 and 10 minutes and kind of slipping in because they've been teaching or they've been in a meeting and they're transferring here. So apologies in advance if there's any kind of disruption. But welcome to this T-Level Transition Programme Technical Focus Group. So it's the TLTP TFG event. Let's start using some acronyms before we really get started. My name's Elise James, and I'm one of the technical education advisors with, that's a TEA, with the Association of Colleges, or the AOC, and I'm going to be facilitating this event today. With me on the call, I have a couple of colleagues. So one is Sarah Reeves.
Morning.
And Sarah is one of the advisors for the T-Level and Transition Programme support programme. So the advisors have a caseload. Each provider has an advisor that goes in and meets regularly with various staff. Do you want to say a little bit more about your role so that people perhaps might want to look out for their own advisors?
Yeah, so we support providers, whether it's FE colleges, independent providers, sixth form colleges and schools are looking to deliver T-levels and transition programmes. So with the transition programme, as you're probably aware, we support providers for 2 years. The first year is very much around the planning, so getting you to really think about what your transition programme should look like and making sure that it fits, you know, your local enterprise priorities and your target audience. And then the second year, we work with you with the delivery. So making sure that your programme is evolving as you had planned, but also sharing good practice with other providers as well. And I'm also responsible for the newsletter, which you probably receive. If you don't, pop your email address into the chat and I can make sure you receive the newsletter as well. And my background is, I used to be curriculum director for sort of business admin, legal, finance and initial teacher training as well. So I've got a lot of knowledge around this particular area as well.
Thanks, Sarah. And yeah, please do, if you haven't been receiving the newsletter, because we're really keen to get it out to as many people as possible. And often when we send it to the transition lead or the T-level lead, it doesn't always necessarily get disseminated to the people who may benefit from it the most. So yeah, if you put your email in the chat, and then Sarah can make sure she captures that. And also, if you're not sure who your advisor is, if you just put a note again in the chat, then it might be something that my colleagues can look into either today or they can get back to you later with more details about who your advisor is, so that maybe if they are coming in, you can arrange to have some time with them. And you might find, like Sarah, they've got that kind of subject expertise that they might be able to use, but also because they have that caseload, they're talking to lots of different providers. There might be lots of really good kind of case studies and references that they can give you in terms of how things are running elsewhere. Okay, one other colleague is on the call. You can't see her, camera's off. She's just there in the background. That's Abby Stewart, and she's our technical support today. So hopefully nothing's going to go wrong, and you'll be able to see her. Thanks for those of you who've got your camera on. It's really good at events like this to be able to see people and not think that I'm just talking into thin air, that there's real people. Thank you for nodding, giving me your active listening feedback so that I know that you can hear me and you're engaging as well. So thank you for that. Today, the technical focus group is about the people that are actually teaching and delivering on the transition programme. So it's very much goes beyond the kind of transition lead role, where there are other events that look at things more strategically, how it might arise across the whole provider. We're looking very much at specific ones. So today we're focusing on that kind of business and administration route. for the T-level transition programme. So you should be able to see on the slide what we're looking at today is a very brief overview. So there is an assumption with this programme that everybody here is already delivering on the T-level transition programme. If you are not delivering, if you could let me know in the chat, so just so that I'm aware of that. And the reason that we're focusing on those that are delivering is today's session is very much about supporting you as you prepare to start reviewing your programme. So as part of your annual review, we're going to highlight some of the key things that you may want to ask yourself, but where you may also learn from each other. Okay, so very brief overview of the programme, making those assumptions that you're already familiar with it. But please do ask questions as we go through. So very much today then, we've got some questions and they're going to focus on your experiences of delivering the programme and your use of the monitoring, the diagnostic monitoring and guidance component and how that has been working for you. And as I say, we've got some kind of key questions that you may want to ask yourself as part of your programme review, but also an opportunity to hear perhaps what other people are doing as part of their review. So just in terms of the expectations, so we have got chat, so please do use the chat. And we'll keep an eye on that, and either Sarah or myself will be replying to that as and when we can see them. We won't be here to debate policy. Policy is already decided. I do like debating policy, but there's nothing we can do about it. So it's a kind of fruitless exercise for us for today. So it is what it is, and there's nothing going to change. Although I will be talking to you about consultation towards the end. But depending on the numbers that we've got for the discussions, we may go into breakouts or we'll just stay in the same room. So it's nice for you to get an opportunity to kind of talk between a few people as we go through. So a couple of presentations, but predominantly we've got these questions which are there to prompt you to have a discussion about your experiences as you go through it. Sarah's going to be taking lots of notes, including any questions that you ask, because we're compiling a list of frequently asked questions. So although it's called frequently asked questions, if it's only been asked once, it'll still go on the list and we'll put some answers there. And we're going to be referring to a resource, Padlet, which is where we've got lots of resources that have been developed. Have any of you been and used the resources that are on Padlet, or any of you aware of the resources that are on Padlet? Some shaking of heads. If you use the reactions button, give a thumbs up if you've seen it, if you've used it. If not, Abby, would you put the link to Padlet in the chat, and then people, when we perhaps we can have a look at that later. Okay, great. So let's have a look then at the aims. So I've mentioned it's about sharing experiences, reviewing how student progress is monitored, but generally it's about you having an opportunity to discuss what's been happening with your programs, but perhaps with some kind of targeted, focused questions to enable you to do that. Thanks, Abby. Okay, so just as a reminder, and this is one of the things that you might want to think about in your review when we look at intent, if you like. What was the intent of your T-level transition programme? So the slide sets out the intent from the department's perspective. So this is why the programme, the study programme, has been organised in the way that it has for this particular purpose and to meet these principles. So perhaps when you're looking at reviewing your programme, you may want to go back and think in terms of intent, was that your intended purpose of this programme? How were you differentiating this programme from other programmes at level 2? And in terms of those principles, to what extent were you embedding those principles in the design of your programme and the delivery of your programme? So when you're looking at your review, they may be the things that you want to look at. Now, these are taken directly from the framework for delivery. Has everybody seen the framework for delivery that sets out what the expectations are? Okay. We'll make sure that the link is put in just in case people haven't, because I can see some people taking notes. So the key thing around this, as you would imagine, is a T-level transition program. It's about preparing students for progression to and success on a T-level. We acknowledge that some students may not still progress to a T-level, but the whole design of it is for that purpose. And therefore, it's important to think about, if you've designed it for some other purpose, but still calling it a T-level transition program, then perhaps it's not the right program for your needs, because it's been designed specifically for that purpose. Although lots of people talk about how actually it's a really good study program for progression generally anyway. But principles: prepare for what students will experience on T-levels. So you might want to consider, to what extent have you organised your programme to prepare students for what they will experience? Now, only you know what your T-level will look like, and therefore what those students will need to prepare them for that. So, for example, if you have lots of visits, site visits, if you have lots of visiting speakers, if you have online masterclasses, if you have lots of project-based work, if you have lots of formative assessment exam style questions that you use throughout your T-level to prepare students, if you do lots of presentations, if you do lots of group work, that's the kind of thing, therefore, that needs to be included as part of your T-level transition program, your TLTP. So thinking about your T-level and how that is represented in your T-level transition program is one of the key things from the principles. To what extent are you developing your core knowledge, skills and behaviours, which I'll talk about in a minute? Are you ensuring that students are clear about what they need to achieve in order to progress to that T-level? Is it exactly the same entry requirements for those students that have been with you for a year as it would be for students that are making direct entry straight from school? Or are you saying, actually, we need a percentage attendance? We need evidence that you're handing work in on time, that you're doing coursework outside of timetable classes. Are you looking for any aspects of attitude and behaviour that you're looking at as part of your programme that perhaps you wouldn't have been expecting from someone that's got direct entry? So is it really, really clear what students need to have in order to make progress to the T-level? To what extent are you providing a holistic and integrated approach? So that's one of the questions that we're going to focus on in a moment. And what are you doing to help students to make the right decision about what to do after the programme, and how are you embedding that in your programme? So those are the core principles. So part of your programme review should be looking at how well are you incorporating and meeting those principles through the way that you've designed your programme. And some of the questions that we've got will hopefully enable you to be able to look at that. So in the previous slide, it mentioned the core knowledge, skills and behaviours. So if you've seen the framework for delivery, you've probably noticed where there are 5 key areas for core knowledge, skills and behaviours, and that's part of the holistic programme. So the expectation is that this is delivered through the technical knowledge and skills component, rather than 5 separate lessons or one lesson that's here are your core knowledge, skills and behaviours lesson. So they cover English, maths and digital skills, and we know that English and maths is one of the key aspects of a T-level transition programme and is often delivered separately, so that students have the opportunity to really focus and develop the skills that they need to get their English and maths qualifications. That is probably one of the key requirements for progression onto a T-level. But the expectation is also that English, maths and the digital skills are also developed in a contextualised way that is relevant to the route. So through your delivery of your business content, you're also looking at things like English, maths and digital skills, skills for successful study. Not that it's a separate timetable slot, but that it's incorporated within your delivery. Knowledge and skills for the workplace. So what do they need when they're in the workplace? Those behaviours. Employers are much more interested in behaviours than they are qualifications, particularly for young people. You know, what about their attitudes? What about their timekeeping? What about their presentation, how they look, how they behave, how they introduce themselves, how they communicate with other people? So knowledge and skills for the workplace, those kinds of behaviours, professional behaviours, if you like, industry relevant technical knowledge and skills, and those are delivered through the National Technical Outcomes, which also include knowledge and skills for the workplace. There's an opportunity for skills for successful study, English, maths and digital skills, and the positive attitude and behaviours. So those are expected to be threaded through the delivery of the transition programme, not that they are delivered separately in its own entity on a timetable. And then the other thing is there are 6 components. So there are 5 key skills areas, 6 components, all of which are expected to overlap in the way that is shown on this Venn diagram. That they're not seen as separate components that are all broken down. The key one is the technical knowledge and skills, because that is the one that is relevant to the route. And that is often what students are most interested in and is seen as the most motivating and engaging aspect of the programme. And that's why it needs to be delivered holistically, where all of the other components hang from the technical knowledge and skills component. And the technical knowledge and skills component is driven by the National Technical Outcomes, which also enable you to meet one of those 5 core skills, knowledge, skills and behaviours, those 5 key skill areas. So the technical knowledge and skills is important, but actually is not expected to be the largest component. So it's expected to be relatively small, because the transition programme is about those knowledge, skills and behaviours, but using the technical component as the kind of vehicle, the hook upon which everything else hangs. So it's not expected that they do, I don't know, 480 or 360 hours of technical content, because students coming straight from school don't do 360 hours of technical content. What is it that means that these students couldn't progress to a T level? Probably they weren't as good learners at school. So what they really need are the opportunities to develop the skills to be better learners. So the expectation is that it's a holistic programme, that you take a small amount of technical content and you use that technical content to deliver the rest of the content, deliver the components, and to deliver the 5 skill areas. So again, when you're reviewing your programme, looking back at those principles and that principle about holistic and integrated delivery, to what extent are you doing that? To what extent have you got, here's your qualification, here's your pastoral 1 hour a week, here's your 1 hour a week working with a careers team or working on kind of developing your personal with a progression tutor or something like that. And here's your English and maths lessons. And to what extent actually have you looked at ways in which a lot of this can all be brought together? So those are the critical things when you're looking at your transition programme. Before we move on then to look at the questions and the overview, any comments on what I've said? There's nothing in the chat so far. Any questions about anything that I've said in terms of the transition programme? Anything where you'd want to disagree with anything that I've said and your interpretation of having read the framework for delivery? Jonathan.
Thank you, and I'm sure it'll raise its head later. I've got no challenge to what you've said. I think it makes perfect sense. I think on a practical level, we've struggled with that integration to some degree because of how things are sort of structured across the college. So yes, they do have a separate maths and English section on their timetable. We do integrate that within their technical study, obviously with their finance and report writing and use of technology and so on. But I do, certainly for our program, I do feel that it's not much different to how it was when it was its old level 2 progression onto sort of BTEC programs. And I'm struggling to kind of to develop that integration more, really.
Yeah, and we do find that with providers where there is this requirement often, well, they must have 1 hour a week of this cross-college thing, and they must have 1 hour a week of this cross-college thing, and they must follow this cross-college approach. And also, predominantly, they must do a relatively large qualification as part of their program. So I understand it does become difficult if, as a college, as a provider, there is this kind of requirement to stick to the kind of provider-wide approach. Where we're finding there's a lot more success is where the provider-wide approach is changing and acknowledging that different requirements for different programs for different students, but also where the qualification is smaller to give the time to integrate. So a lot of it is going back to, if I've chosen a qualification approach, yeah, I'll come to you in a minute, Susan. If I've chosen a qualification approach, which qualification have I chosen and why? So going back to your curriculum intent, is this the best qualification to support progression to a T level and the integration of the different components and the core knowledge, skills and behaviours? And for many, it's about looking at that qualification and giving you the opportunity to be more integrated by having a smaller qualification. So if you've got a small qualification, the NTOs are the size of a GCSE. So if you take a 1 GCSE size qual, then that gives you the time to integrate everything else. The students, this is one of the questions we'll come to in a minute. If your cohort, what GCSEs have your cohort already got that's already at your entry requirements? And for many, it's the English and maths rather than necessarily. They've probably got 2 or 3 other GCSEs. And if they have their English and maths, they've probably got their entry requirements. So the qualification you're giving them as part of the T-level transition program, you then have to think, why have we incorporated that particular qualification into our program? And instead start thinking about which qualification best supports us to be able to meet the principles of the transition program. Because as you say, if you've got other study programs for other purposes, then maybe the other program is fine. You don't need a transition program. So it's about being really clear about why you've got a transition program. And if you've got that transition program, what it is that you're doing within it, because you don't need to do a qual, you don't need to do a big qual. It's a study program in its own right. It's got its own entry code. It's got its own requirements. Okay. And Susan, you wanted to come in, and I noticed you made some comments in the chat as well.
I'm just listening to the 2 classes I'm trying to supervise behind me that are going on. I find it really difficult. We tried the approach. I teach on a construction T level, but as a college, we have now been told that we will only offer 1 level 2 course within the business department. So the people coming into our level 2, as it is, level 2 transition, some want to progress to a construction T level, some don't know anything about T levels. Some should have been on a level 2 skills program, so they have no GCSEs, they haven't got any passes. So we've got a real mixed bag. So what we tried was we took our diploma and dropped it to an extended certificate, which halves the amount of teaching hours that they have to get. And we introduced the 3 core projects to try and deliver the technical and skills outcomes. The first, and I'm writing all of those, we're midway through and almost finished our second one. So doing that holistic thing, which I do in construction, has been good, it integrates the work. But what I'm finding is the technical skill levels are far too high. The expectation that we can teach people the difference between Prince and Agile project management systems at level 2 is ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. Management of change is something we teach at level 3. I'm having to try and teach them in 10 minutes the 4 P's of marketing, which is stuff that we normally cover on level 3. So I'm finding that the holistic nature of doing the projects is fine, but it's incredibly labor intensive. And what I've had to do is literally, my approach was the first project is heavily structured, heavily scaffolded. You do what you want, you find the information on the internet, you try and adapt it. The second one is slightly more laid back. Your project manager takes more of an ownership. And I've had to suspend the second project because it's too much to expect them. Some of those students are never going to go on a T level. They aren't interested in a T level, but they have to come out with a decent qualification. So at this point, they're going to come out with half the qualification they would have got on the old thing. And while I see the value of a T-level transition as an additional course, if it's the only course, it's proving incredibly hard to deliver. So much so that one of the staff has left, we can't replace her. And I'm literally supervising 2 classes at a time to try and get through it. So I think there's a challenge there, and I know you say it's written and it won't be changed, but those technical levels, I haven't compared them to the T-level in business and admin, but they have got to be the same. And if we are trying to struggle at level 2 to teach them content that they're going to then get given properly at level 3, it's a waste of time. We would be better off spending the time doing more of the taught level 2 stuff we used to do, so that everyone who leaves is going to have a good solid grounding. And we've got, so far, I've got a class of about 17 students, of which 2 are going on to T level. So it's difficult as a provider, and part of that is the college decision that, you know, our staff costs are too high and we can only have 1 level 2 course. But it's also the frustration of knowing the T level well and knowing what I want to deliver, but it's just pitched at far too high a level. I mean, we have said 4 weeks of work experience. We can't get 4 weeks of work experience for them. The idea that they have an hour a week with a pastoral support worker would be a dream come true, instead of having to sit at the back of my level 3 classes doing their projects while I supervise them. You know, most colleges don't have the staffing to treat this as, I'm sorry, I don't want it to be a rant, but most of the colleges do not have the money to have a dedicated T-level entry course. And we do all of that in the T-level anyway. So a lot of this stuff about, you know, working in teams, stuff that we would have done for employability anyway, is useful. But I think to hit all of those technical skills and outcomes is becoming me delivering lots of very high level lessons that they're not getting, and them going and Googling the answers on internet so that they can get something in. And then
well, I think there's 2 things there, isn't there? There's one around what I started with, which is the intent. So your senior leadership team have made that decision. And as part of your program review, you know, going back to your intent and whether or not this is the right program for your students is something that you need to be able to consider. But that's the thing then, if as a provider, there's a decision that it's a transition program, then it has to be a transition program.
But I don't think they would ever say they won't have a transition program, because T levels are where the funding is.
Well, they are, but that doesn't mean to say that other level 2 study programs, which have got your main qualification as the focus, if that's what's important to you, getting a decent size level 2 qualification, then it's not a transition program. So this is part of the program review. Is the transition program the right study program for your level 2 student, or is a different study program the right one? And that's the starting point, isn't it? The other thing about the NTOs, there is no level. So management of change could be delivered in 5 minutes. You decide what the level is. You decide what it is you're teaching about the management of change. Do they understand the concept of the management of change? But also, it's not around necessarily covering lots and lots of detail around the content. It's making reference to it. It's introducing them to it. So it's about, these are level 3 concepts, which these students might find challenging if they went straight in at level 3. So introduce them to it at level 2. So
I don't think that's
down
clear
to level
from,
2.
excuse me, I don't think that's clear from the paperwork.
Well,
The
the
paperwork
whole thing
implies
is it's
that
content.
they must
It's
pass.
content.
Yeah.
You decide what you want to teach about that content, how much of that content you want to teach, where you want the weighting of that content to come in. It's just a curriculum. It's just a list of content that you need to cover, that the students need to learn. But the key thing around that content is it's there as a vehicle to support them to develop their research skills, to develop their communication skills, to develop their team working skills, to develop their report writing skills, to develop their digital skills. It's just there as a vehicle to be able to do that.
So it's not, a be all end all then.
No.
Oh, that's fine, because when I was asked to deliver this, I was told we have to evidence that they have got those skills at the end.
So the
skills
are in the skills column.
Yeah,
the
skills
knowledge is
column,
in the
but
so
the
management
knowledge.
of change is in the
we
knowledge.
don't have to evidence that they have used that knowledge in the project.
Well, if the project,
as long as we've given them it.
So if the project, the outcome, the line at the top, which is presumably the plan for business change.
Yeah.
If they can plan for business change without showing any knowledge of the management of change, I'd be surprised.
Yeah,
but
I'd be very
it's
surprised.
It's not like it's a BTEC where you've got to tick it
So
all
it's
off.
not,
It's
right,
about,
that's fine.
as part of my planning, I need to think about how I'm going to manage this.
Right,
and therefore
okay.
they might, if they were giving a presentation, you might ask them a question. They might, in their presentation, if they're producing a report, then they might put it in the report. As part of my plan, I need to think about how I'm bringing people on board, how I'm training people for this change. So they're making reference to the concept, that they have understood enough about it to know that they need to take it into account when they're meeting that outcome. That's the critical thing that you're looking at. And that's what I mean. The content is almost irrelevant. It's you know, it's also, it's not about just telling them to research something. They need to learn how to research. So how do you teach them to do the research? How are you teaching them to use Google? How are you getting them to use the different techniques to refine their Google searches? How are you getting them to look at the difference between this website and this website, and which one is credible? You know, which one's providing information that's useful, that's authoritative, that's current? Where is the bias? So it's very much around, the teaching should be around the skills, the broader skills, and you'll find throughout the 3 outcomes that are in there, you've got a whole range of skills that are included, because really the technical skills that are in there are the digital ones. They're about using spreadsheets, coming up with presentation software, writing reports, creating templates that people can fill in, business documentation. Really the kind of technical skills are digital that's in there, business admin skills. The rest is all planning, team working, communication, some maths, analysis, data interpretation, all of that kind of thing. Yeah. Okay, some people coming up with some things in the chat. Okay. Sam, you don't need to evidence NTOs. Sam, yeah, Sam, what are you meaning with you don't need to evidence NTOs? You're on mute. Sometimes if you put your finger on the space bar and hold the space bar down. It'll at least should release the mute when, there you go. Hold your finger on this pause, but on the, yeah, now you should be able to talk.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, technology is not my strong point. So we've just had Ofsted come in for the thematic review. They've been looking closely at our college, and I've been working with them. Department for Education, I believe at the moment that we don't have to provide any evidence for the NTOs. We're finding, I mean, we deliver the transition across all our level 2 provision, even though, for example, sport, there's not a T level for them, but we still adopted that transition program. We find that actually the NTOs are quite easily embedded across the program. As I stated there, we have been doing 3 projects, but next year we're going to cut it down to 2. We do a foundation or a higher project qualification as part of it. And from day 1 next year, we're going to be delivering the skill set. And I think that's really important to the whole program. Like you said, how do they research? How do they explore different ideas of what their project's going to be about? We look at academic writing styles, how to source reliable sources, everything that's going to help them really transition to T-level or whatever suitable vocational A-level. We see all of those as a positive progression.
Yeah. The key thing is not, I know a lot of people have done mapping of the NTOs to the qualification that they want to use. The key thing is the outcome. So the purpose of the outcomes is to get the student to be able to meet the outcome, and the content is there. That's what they need to learn in order to be able to meet the outcome. So if you're working on projects, then each of the outcomes lends itself to a project. But if it's 120 to 150 guided learning hours for the NTOs, then each one is 30 to 50 guided learning hours. So if that's 30 to 50 guided learning hours, okay, so we have to look at this different to the way that we look at perhaps a lot of other qualifications, where the assessment overtakes the learning. The amount of time spent to produce the evidence for assessment is more than the time that is given for learning. It's almost like they learn by doing the assessment. This is different. This is about spending lots and 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 lots of time on learning and a little bit of time on assessment. So the kind of projects probably that you'd be looking at for each of the NTOs would be, I don't know, 5 hours max. It's for you to be able to say, can you, I can't remember them all off the top of my head, but support others to meet, I can't remember, documentation, plan for change, measure business success. I can't remember what they're all called exactly. Ros, hiya, I'll see you again.
Hello, how are you?
Yeah, good, thank you.
Sorry I was a bit late. I had to go and
Yeah.
set some cover for Clark. You know, it's normal stressy Friday. Anyway, I didn't know if it was helpful, and if I'm, barking up the wrong tree, I didn't know if it was useful to kind of explain how we've organised our transitions course here. And Vanessa is also on the call today, and she's one of my business teachers, so she can correct me if I've got it wrong or add any bits on. If this might help everybody on the call. And Sam, I really listened to what you say, and I think we're quite similar. So because I look after media business and digital, I've got T-levels running in digital and business. We're an early adopter of digital, so maybe we're a little bit further along the road than others, and we're happy to help and support and advise, and you don't have to listen, or you can listen, or whatever. So I've been running Transitions Digital for 2 years. This is the 2nd year, and this is the year when we had the framework. The year before we didn't have a framework, which was really, really unhelpful, because we were like, kind of, well, what do we do? So with that, we continue to run our level 2 qualifications under BTEC, which isn't right to prepare a young person for T-level. So therefore, with the framework, we had the opportunity to look at that holistically, and then look at the T-level we were preparing the youngsters for. So therefore, if you like, we started at the T-level worked back, looked at what the transitions course was, the framework was providing us with, and then thought, oh, how can we organize this and design this so that our learners are preparing not only for the T level, but for industry placement and everything. So getting all those wider skills. So we do run a qualification. We run a qualification in digital transition, and we run a qualification in the business transition program. For business, we're currently running NCFE level 1-2 enterprise. Is that right, Vanessa? Nod your head. Yes, she's nodding her head. Yeah. So
business and enterprise.
Business and enterprise.
Yeah.
And that is a 120-hour qual. Is small, but one thing that does is it covers some of the national technical outcomes, but its assessment methodology is a synoptic project which mirrors the ESP of the T level that our students would progress onto, plus a written exam which models the T level. So we are modeling in our transitions the assessment methodology ready for the T level that follows afterwards. We teach that, and that does take up some of our time of the week, but we also have 3 to 5 hours per week of professional development. Hang on, I wrote some notes yesterday because I'm doing a podcast with DFE on this next week. So, which I can't find my paperwork now, would you believe? So with that, what we do is in that sessions, we do all the wider skills, employability, skills and behaviours for the workplace, all the resilience and work readiness, and all those wider softer skills as well. So we have a team of people that work completely together to cover everything that's on that transitions program in a whole program, and the students that are on the course don't even realise the difference between what is a taught qual and what is the transitions kind of skills development between all that. Would you say that's a fair assessment, Vanessa?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, there's no differentiation between it all. So whatever they do, it's all integrated, and it is that holistic aspect which is really important. And again, that links in as what Rosa said to the T level. And yeah, we've worked backwards so that it can be mirror that, so that they have those skills ready to progress onto that level 3 T level qualification.
Does that help, Elise?
Yeah, thanks. And I think this is what we're finding with a number of providers going for that kind of small, very small qualification, 1 GCSE size, that gives you the scope. And it's and a lot of this actually, I'll move the slide on a little bit, because one of the things that we're looking at is the kind of cohort that you've got. Do you know your cohort? Do you know what a transition program student looks like? Do you know their profile in terms of their existing qualifications? So again, that notion that we must have this qualification and this qualification must drive everything that we do, that's not a transition program student. That's not a transition program. If the qualification is driving everything you do, then you're best to do a other type of study program where the qualification is the focus. That doesn't mean to say that students won't have qualifications at the end of it. And what we find with a lot of providers, if they're doing a non-qual approach, they're not doing a non-qual approach. They're doing a qual approach, they're just not doing a technical qualification. So in business, they might not be doing a business qualification, as Sam was saying, they might be doing a project qualification. So the higher project is worth half a GCSE. So that's an opportunity. The content of the business, 120 hours, equivalent in size to a GCSE in business, which also gives you an opportunity for an exam-based assessment if you wanted to. And then if you were doing the outcomes, that's your kind of modeling the ESP as well. What we also find is, as you were saying, Ros, if you've got a qualification that works really well with the NTOs, you know, one of the things that you can look at is, because the NTOs are not summative, you can use it for formative assessment, but you use it focused for learning. So some providers are saying, well, let's start with the NTOs, let's teach the NTOs, let's have some formative assessment around the outcomes, and then do the qual. Because actually, if we've been delivering the NTOs in the way that they're supposed to, and we're really developing their skills, the performance in the qual will be so much better because they've actually got that underpinning learning and skills. Okay. Your other option, some like, let's get the qualification out of the way and then we'll focus on the NTOs. But to me, I think a lot of value in using the NTOs as a vehicle for learning and really developing the skills that they need. And then maybe if you're going to have a qual, you do the qual towards the end. So the project qual, because the other thing is for some providers, they might do the higher project qualification relatively early within the course, even though you submit in the May. And if the students are doing good work, you might set them a project or allow them to work on another project, which means they can do the extended project qualification, which is level 3. And that's also one of the things that we're finding is that some providers are looking at small level 3 qualifications or a level 3 unit in a level 3 qualification that students are working towards, so that they get something at level 3 rather than level 2, so that they're used to kind of the challenge and demand that might be there. So there's lots of different ways in which you can look at qualifications. And sometimes, as I've said, if you speak to your employers, your stakeholders that are employers, and find out what they want, they're not so interested in a business qualification. They're perhaps more interested in general qualifications. So it might be, for example, a digital qualification to record all of the kind of digital skills that they're developing might work a bit better. Or using a business admin qualification where those kind of admin skills are the focus as the qualification, as the vehicle to develop some of the technical skills that are in there, and then coming in with the NTO. So there's lots of different ways that you can look at qualifications. So I see, Sam, you've put in details of your other one, but again, you're going to drop it down. And I think this is part of the issue then, is looking at your cohort. What does a T-level transition program student look like? And I appreciate, Susan, it's very difficult for you, but I've also been to a provider where everybody is doing a transition program, but the students know which ones that are on that program are the ones that are planning to go on to a T-level and which ones are not. So for example, everybody has to be registered against one of the routes. But that doesn't mean to say, for example, construction, T-level in construction has got business content in it. So it's important, therefore, that construction students are aware of that and perhaps having that kind of underpinning foundation before they move on to their construction. And therefore, why not deliver the NTOs in a construction context? So they're getting their construction reference, and the students that are much more interested in business, well, they should be learning about business in lots of different contexts and lots of different industry sectors. And so it can be that. And I think one of the benefits of the NTOs is you have that opportunity to be flexible enough to, well, we've got a really good travel agent that we can work with. You know, our local authority is good. There's a social enterprise down the road that's able to work with us, which means that you can really tailor those NTOs to your local area, the local stakeholders that you've got available. So thinking about your student cohort, and really getting to grips with who they are and what their profile is, and maybe looking at the qualifications that they've got. So part of your review might be to look back at your data. What did those transition program or those level 2 students come in with? What was their profile? Where were they with their English and maths? I was reading something recently where someone said, well, actually, we've looked and they don't need English and maths to be able to do this T-level. Actually, a really good history grade is as good an indication of their ability to read and interpret written information as an English qualification is. Yes, they still have to do some English, but we can organise that separately. And we don't necessarily need them to fit into a particular, demand that says, oh, well, that means they're in for 5 days a week and they're doing all this many hours. So part of looking back when you delivered your T-level is to what extent did they really need 4s, 5s in English GCSE and maths to cope with the T-level? Yes, they'll need to keep doing English and maths if they haven't got it, but getting that kind of reflection. Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, so I was just picking up on your point there of, that if they don't have English or maths and they have history, then obviously they're going to have to do English and or
again.
maths.
Yeah.
And then that does mean that they are, usually back in on a 5-day week or whatever.
But that again is part of, if you highlight that, it is a cross-college, cross-provider issue. But if you've got 4 or 5 T levels, does that mean that they all have to do that full English and maths delivery? Or is it something that you can do in different ways, where maybe there's some online sessions, maybe they only have to be in for 1 hour, and it's some hour that can be slotted into their normal 4-day-a-week program, so that they're not in for that 5th day. So when you look across the piece, across the provider, and look at the T levels and the number of students, maybe the T level students get a different English and maths resit offer to other students, maybe your level 2 students, and the others that are still doing other level 3 programs which are smaller. So it's that looking at that profile, looking at those students, working out and looking back and thinking from reverse engineering, did we really need that? And yes, the implication is that is that a reason to stop them getting on a T level if a student is willing to do that? Again, if you're doing construction, some of the construction, you need the maths. If you haven't demonstrated that you've got a certain level of math skills, you are really going to struggle to move those math skills even further on. But there are others where that's not the case. And as I say, where English, what does that tell us? That history can't tell us. So if you've got a GCSE in something where they've clearly had to read and write, and what you're really looking for is their literacy skills, then other GCSEs might work better for that. But having a look at the profile, having a look at the qualifications that your transition program students have already got, what is it that they were missing? And then start thinking about, so what is the importance of the qualification? And again, talking to your other stakeholders, because if you're talking to your local employers, you'll probably find that they're not bothered about an extended certificate or a diploma. They're quite happy with, it's great if they've got English and maths, because they'll get on a good apprenticeship program if they've got their English and maths. But if they haven't, then that's another thing that they can look at as well. And in terms of English and maths, I was with a provider and they were saying that they have 3 sessions a week, and the students can online that the students can log into any one of those 3. So depending on whether they've got part-time work, so one might be a twilight, one might be a morning, one might be an afternoon, and they can log on to whichever one is appropriate. And that's more when you're looking probably as a transition lead or a T-level lead across the whole provision, or if you've got a whole department, you're responsible for a whole department, looking at what those T levels are and seeing whether there's something that you can organise to accommodate for them in that way. Yeah. So in terms of the student cohort, one of the things with the Padlet that Abby's already put the link in, if you go on to Padlet, there was a number of resources that are produced, and one of those was this one. Using expected student profiles for T-level transition program. So all of the resources that we've produced have the same kind of style, look the same, they've got some narrative, but they also include some documents that you can use in terms of you setting out what your expected profile looks like. Because if you're going to go back and look at was your cohort as expected, so you've designed your model in order to meet your expected cohort, you need to know what your expected cohort's going to look like. So these are available as templates that you can use as well to start looking at developing your own ideas for what a cohort looks like. And one of the things that's on there is the kind of exception. So we know there's an average student, and if you're developing a qualification, it's one of the things you start with is what is my expected student cohort? And then you start thinking about, well, what are the exceptions to that? So if you look back at your existing cohorts, and if you've been running this for a couple of years, looking back over the last couple of years and see whether or not there's something that you can find there that says, well, actually, this is what we say is our average, but we're also finding some students that come in with these differences. That enables you to start thinking about how you might organise your programme in order to be able to accommodate that. So in terms of cohorts, have people been looking at their cohort as part of their review? And what is it that you look at when you're looking at your student cohort?
I think one thing that is noticeable about the student cohort on the T-level transition programme is that they're not your traditional level 2 kind of students. They are, want of a better word, and this is probably, they're like a near miss from T-level. They haven't got an English and maths grade that they need. For example, in digital, I know we're talking about business today, but in digital, our students, because we asked for a 5 in maths, so on our T-level transition programme for digital, those with 4s are on that, because we view this very much as a preparation year for T-level. So therefore they are improving their math skills in that particular curriculum. So this course really is your preparation, or how we view it is it's your preparation year for the T-level. And at the moment, I don't have any alternative level 2s for learners that need a far more practical rather than academic approach. We just do the T-level transitions programme and T-level, but we may offer an alternative. We'll have to see, but it's those students that just are a near miss, if you like. But want to focus on that area. They want a career in that particular thing, and they want to be in business, and they want to be in management, and that's what they want. So they are quite driven.
Yeah, and I think that near miss approach is something that we find people talk about a lot, and generally when we first started with the programme, it was very much about trying to get providers to identify what it is about a transition programme student that makes them different to any other level 2 student. And the only thing that came out was they haven't got their English and maths. So that's why in a lot of transition programmes, there's a hell of a lot of time being given to English and maths, so that they really can focus on developing the skills and their understanding of the concepts so that they can do well. And as you were saying, for a lot of providers, it is about having a 5, which if they've got a 4, then they don't meet the condition of funding. But with a transition programme, you can keep teaching them the English and maths if they've got a 4 in order to be able to get the 5. So there's a lot of benefits to the transition programme. And that's why some that are looking at it across the piece see it as really beneficial, because what they're doing is delivering a programme that prepares students for their next step. And although the intent is that the next step is their T-level, it's also going to be any other level 3 study. And in reality, if people want to go to work after, is this the wrong programme for them? You know, the fact that they're good team workers, good communicators, good time managers, developing professional values and behaviours, that's not going to mean that they're not going to be able to move into the workplace. That still is. And the thing around the programme is, unlike the T-level where you have to do the 315 hours of industry placement, the framework for delivery sets out work experience as a nice to have. It's not an expectation for every student. It would be good if students could go out on work experience, but there are other ways of giving them experience of the workplace. It doesn't mean that they have to have work experience. So that's something for you to decide, whether all students go out, whether some students go out. Some providers, you only go out on work experience if you meet certain requirements, and they have an assessment of their work experience readiness. And if they meet those requirements, then they can go on the work experience. And if they don't, then they have to stay. So lots of issues there. Yeah, it is very much around a 3-year programme. And I think that's the other thing. A lot of providers are talking not about come on this programme to do this and get these qualifications, but as part of your progression to the T-level. So seeing it much more as a holistic 3-year programme, and often looking at how some of the classes can be with T-level students as well. Okay, So let's have a quick break because we're halfway through. We'll see whether or not there's anything around these questions people want to come up with, because I know there's some people who haven't spoken yet. So it may be that myself or others haven't given them space. So apologies for that. We'll see if you want to comment on any of those things, and then we'll look at the diagnostic monitoring and guidance. So we're just going to have 5 minutes, as much as anything. I need to get up and walk around a bit. It's not good for me to be sat here for 2 hours on a trot. So quick 5-minute break. See you at 5 past. If that's okay with everyone. Hi, I can see some people have come back. Can you give me a thumbs up if you've not got your camera on, just so that I can see? I know I've got 3 people, so I'm not just talking to myself. Thanks, Sarah. Will, are you back? Ros, thank you. Brianne, thank you. Maybe Will and Beatrice. Beatrice, are you back? No, maybe not Will. Just in terms of the holistic approach, I'm just sharing on the screen a spreadsheet, which I think you may have been sent. If not, we'll make sure we can send you a copy, where we've simply got the core knowledge, skills and behaviours down the left-hand side and the components across the top. Just part of the kind of opportunity for you to look and see to what extent you've been able to incorporate some of these things into your delivery. The key bit really is to try and get as much of it as you can through your technical knowledge and skills component, because that then follows that kind of principle, or at least the vision that the technical knowledge and skills is the hook through which this learning takes place. So, for example, rather than knowledge about different T levels and associated careers is not delivered in a careers section under pastoral support, but is part of when you're teaching them about business content, that you're able to refer to different job roles that might be involved in, say, going back to Susan's point about the management of change and what the different job roles might engage with as part of that management of change, and how that might be different in different types of organizations of different sizes, in different sectors, and so on, so that you're able to link it to that. Obviously, within this route, we've only got the 1 T level, but there are different occupational specialisms within that T level, which you might be able to bring into your delivery. So whether it's the kind of knowledge management, team leading, business support, what's the other one? Everybody just seems to be doing the business support and the team leading one, so I always forget the other 2. But has anybody else got documents like this that they're using as part of their planning? Yeah, Ros, you've got something like that. Okay, great. But again, as part of your review, might be something that you find useful in terms of showing the holistic nature. And we are expecting, we're starting to find there's a lot of quality managers come into our events that are starting to see, well, actually, we need to have different quality measures for the transition programme than we're using for other programmes, because they're very different, and we need to be looking for different aspects when we're looking at quality. We're not just looking at their achievement of a qualification, we're looking at the extent to which they are actually meeting the curriculum intent and the principles and so on. So yeah, thank you. Okay, just move that one out. Any comments anybody wants to make around any of those questions before we move on to the next section? So the next bit then, starting to look at diagnostic monitoring and guidance, which is one of the components. But again, real opportunity through diagnostic monitoring and guidance to incorporate that across the programme, and not necessarily as something that is about achieving a qualification. Because as Ros and others have been saying, if this is about preparing students for a T-level, knowing what it is about a student that enables them to progress to and be successful on a T-level enables you to do that kind of diagnostic monitoring and guidance aspect. So often when we talk to providers, they talk about the diagnostic, but not so much around the monitoring or the guidance that comes as a result of that. So some really interesting activities that are taking place often in terms of the diagnostic, where lots of providers are moving away from just putting people in front of a computer and getting them to do a maths test and an English test, but actually using projects, using activities, seeing much more about the learner as a whole rather than their specific skills. So I think, Ros, when we were at an event, there was a lot around that kind of 1 week or 2 week kind of project-based approach where students are doing research, they're doing individual work, they're doing group work, they might be doing something in writing, they might have to give a presentation, they might have to do some kind of discussion work. So all related to the same theme or the same kind of project. And one of the things that a lot of providers have said, that one of the problems with qualifications is because the assessment is always summative, you're not allowed to really give them rich feedback about what they've really learned and what they really need to be able to do better and how they can make those improvements. Because if you do that, that doesn't meet the awarding body requirements for allowing them to do another version. One of the things around doing a project early on is you could get them to do it again later in the course when they've had some learning. And that is often one of the things that helps them with their confidence. Well, did I really do that 3 months ago? God, that was rubbish. Look at what I can do now. Obviously, we don't tell them it was rubbish, but you know, that ability for them to see how much further they, no, we don't, how much further forward they are moving, which for these students who have near misses and weren't successful is really quite an important thing. So thinking about the diagnostic bit, but the monitoring bit that's important as well as you go through. So the slide there is showing what's in the framework for delivery, about what is expected to be included, and the kind of ongoing monitoring that needs to take place. And the key thing there is about having clear feedback and supported to develop reflective practice, which builds in that whole peer assessment and building peer assessment into the delivery. So it's not just about you with a qualification where you give that kind of summative feedback, but where they're learning from each other as well as from you. And it's all about supporting further learning rather than, yes, you've met that requirement, tick, move on. It's much more about where are you now? And again, in line with, say, the industry placement on the T level, setting new goals. So the potential, the bespoke nature or the expectation for a transition program to be much more bespoke and individualized might be around the individual goals that they get. Everybody may do the same program, but they're working to different goals based on the diagnostic assessment. So you're still able to do that kind of individualized program, even though everybody's got the same timetable doing the same things. It's because what they're trying to achieve from that is slightly different because of what you saw on the diagnostic. So the extent to which you're incorporating reflective practice, peer learning, peer assessment into that is part of the program that we're looking at. So interested to see what you're doing around what do your students need to achieve to successfully complete your program and progress to their chosen T level. Is it getting exactly the same entry requirements as everyone else? Is it slightly less because you've been working with them for a year and you know what they're capable of, and therefore you feel comfortable accepting lower entry requirements from these students? Is it something other than qualifications? Are you looking for something else or something in addition to that. So interested to hear what you're looking for from your transition program. Anybody willing to say, have you got a definitive statement that says this is what you need to do to get onto your T level? Ross, are you wanting to come in here? It's only that you're lit
I was
up
going to
on
let someone
my
else speak.
Yeah, but you're lit up on my screen, so that's all.
Oh, did I? Oh,
Yeah.
okay, right.
Yeah.
So preferably, learners should get the English and Maths entry requirements. And this is the first year through with the business transition, because this is the first year it's run, because this is wave 3.
Yeah.
3? Yeah,
Yeah.
wave 3. So
Yeah.
therefore we haven't run this one before, but with digital last year, out of the 60% moved on to the T level, one went to a different level 3 course in game design, another one an apprenticeship, but within the digital field. So those 3 learners progressed from so we had 5 in that group. We have much bigger groups this year. So those 3 learners that they went on to the T level, they got their English and Maths and they progressed through. But it's not just about that, it's about the wider aspect. And I think what I call it here is professional behaviors for work. So that encapsulates everything on those kind of wider transferable skills, in terms of basics like attendance and punctuality, all of the English, Maths and digital skills, their approach to their studies, their maturity, their the way that they achieve on their courses, and are they trying hard, working hard, meeting deadlines, participating in all of the wider things. So it's not just about achieving the English and Maths, it is about a wider thing. And one thing I've reflected on actually in the past couple of weeks, and it's only been the last couple of weeks, and I've really been thinking about the T-level transitions program particularly, is that a quick win could be for whoever is your T-level course lead in that particular area or subject specific pathway, should be delivering something, even if it's just a morning a week or less than a week, on that T-level transitions, because they are building that link between those learners on the T-level transitions pathway program ready for the T-level. So that relationship is already there and they know and they can see the learners. So it's just thinking about the wider situation as well. Has that kind of got people thinking about things?
I'm interested to see if other people have got this, other than English, Maths and the 5 GCSEs or whatever. There are other requirements of transition program students. Susan?
I've set them some targets, which I would have done anyway, even if they weren't T-level learners. And I get them to do a self-assessment on different categories, which I've used with level 1, which has been really successful. So they rate themselves on 3 things, which are, I call them attendance, which takes in punctuality, assessment, so how well up with the work they are, and attitude. And their attitude covers a lot of the employability skills. You know, how are they addressing themselves? Are they hardworking? Are they lazy? Do they work well with others? And this year, because it's our first year with the level 2 transition, I'm going to be giving them a project assessment sheet as well, which will contain a lot of the employability stuff about working with others, team leadership, communication skills, a lot of which we teach as part of our OCR level 2 anyway. But the idea is that they graduate from us with their OCR level 2 extended certificate, but they also get a project qualification. And this year, because it's the first year, we said we'll do pass or fail. Next year, I'd like to suggest that we actually maybe look at some laser units or something instead, which can be a lot more interactive and less about writing worksheets and long reports, and maybe get something like that so that they've got something more tangible. I was interested in the project qualification people were talking about. But I also have just literally, I'm sitting in the workroom and I've just literally spoken to the person that runs our level 3 business T level. And at the moment, we don't have any interaction. And I've just said to her, we should look at a system of buddying up some of the people that are on the level T, the T levels, to come in and act as mentors during the projects, because I think that would really help if they were getting some relationships and could see some of the other students, and we could work a program so that they're actually interacting with the T level and they see what's needed and they can model the behaviours. And also those students themselves would get a lot out of it. So certainly in construction, we don't get that many that apply, that need their English and maths and stay around on a business qualification. So what I've done with the business students is when we've had our 3 projects, and the second of which we're going to be finishing soon, I get them to look at construction companies. So we do the same thing, but some of them are looking at clothing industry, some are looking at petrol stations and oil companies, and some look at that. So, and we've had very few IT students, although we used to get a lot of IT students in the past that come on to level 2. So I think the idea of some kind of integration and allowing the students to assess themselves how they've progressed is really good. I haven't tackled Navigate yet all year. With every next crisis or someone leaving or something else has come up or IVing, I've not had a chance, but they can assess their skills on Navigate quite well if only we could get it integrated so they could use it. So I think we need to do a lot more, because my current T levels, I have told them what T levels are about. I've stressed to them when we do the projects, that's why it's different. But they still are, a lot of them want to progress with their friends. And if their friends' English and maths level is too low, they're looking at a BTEC diploma rather than a T level. So I think we need to actively integrate the T levels that we run with the level 2 if we're going to make it successful.
Yeah, I think you know, I think that's part of what Ros was saying as well, and it's one of the things that we're finding quite a lot. More and more providers are starting to see, now they've got both the transition and the T level running, that they're looking at ways in which they can bring them together, either working on projects, but as you were saying, that having that mentor role. So especially if you're using team leadership and supervision as your occupational specialism, you know, once you've got your second year students, you know, they're able to put some of what they're learning into practice by working with your transition program students and taking on that kind of mentoring role, and therefore having some timetabled sessions where they can do that. And even if that's not necessarily a you know, it's not a cost-cutting measure that says all of the students are together, but there is an hour or 2 hours on the timetable that you know that maybe once a month, that's when that class and that class can come together, and whoever's teaching them can facilitate that, you know, whether or not they're doing the project. And it may well be second year T levels are part of that diagnostic assessment for your new transition program students. So they're learning how to give constructive feedback in terms of what they've seen.
Sorry. And it would really help if we have to split the classes next year, because I'm struggling at the moment with whether we effectively stream the class. So in the first year, they all attempt the extended certificate, but in the second year, the employability students, rather than T-level students, could effectively be doing some kind of additional different type of project. And obviously, if you've only got one teacher, then they can't be in 2 places at once. We wouldn't want the full-time element of teaching for the mentoring role. But if I knew that we had at least 4 or 5 sessions I could focus on the other group, that would be great.
Yeah. Sam, you've got your hand up. What do you look at in terms of
so what we look
progression?
at with the progression is that they've completed the program. So in terms of the technical element, the projects, and that they've engaged within the work experience. We started to look at attendance, and we've actually not focusing on that now, because we realize that's not something we would look at for students coming into college new. So we don't judge on that. We do tend to look at them case by case for the students. you know, what is the reason that they haven't done as well? Why haven't they completed this project? Could be, you know, something else going on in the background, pastoral illness. But something that we do, which I'm not sure is something nationally, is our third project. We do something called Pitch to Progression.
I've heard of that.
Yeah. So even if they haven't completed, or there's been a reason that a teacher that maybe aren't aware of them would say, no, you're not coming onto my program, it's a chance for them to pitch themselves to that teacher of who they're going on to. And they do a mixture of the first task, looking at where they're going to be in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So it's a chance to even look at careers, universities, and work backwards as to what they need to get to that next stage. And then the next thing is they demonstrate their passion for what they want to go on to, what industry, looking at problems within that industry and what recommendations they would make. And we've seen really good success with that, with students that maybe might not have been accepted onto the next level, actually getting through by showing, I might have had a bad run of things at the start, but I'm on track now. This is what I want to do. I'm passionate.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sam. That's really useful. I think the pitch to progression, I've heard of that, and I've actually spoke to somebody at the department about it as well, and they really like that idea for students to be able to, that self-promotion, which develops self-confidence, self-awareness, but also then can link to what Susan was saying around having that kind of reflective approach and self-reflection, and using self-assessment to argue, you know, I should progress. I've attended, okay, I didn't attend very well so-and-so, but the last 6 weeks my attendance has improved. So it's not so much around having an average across the year, it's about a trend, if you like, which is then them arguing, isn't it, that they're interpreting data. So they've been able to do something in relation to that. So I think there's a lot of opportunities around that as something that they can do towards the end. I think that's your third project at the moment, isn't it, that they do after they've done their higher project qualification, and then do this pitch to progression, which is a really good opportunity to then for them to kind of demonstrate how they've met the outcomes, you know, to a satisfactory standard as far as they're concerned, because again, from their point of view, they hated standing up and talking, but they actually stood up and did a 5-minute presentation, and they realized that they might have stuttered a lot, or they might have struggled with fluency or fluidity or whatever it is, but at least they stood up and spoke for 5 minutes, and that was something that at the beginning they weren't happy to be able to do, you know.
What I will add to that pitch to progression as well is we start it when we come back from Easter, and they have the last 2 weeks to present it. So that's part of those skills, you know, that they need as well. They decide when they're ready to present, and they contact those teachers and invite them along. Yeah.
So there's a lot of benefits to that. So it's interesting that you the three of you, and I'm not sure if anybody else does, but have these kind of other things that they're looking for. And remember, part of the principles is the students know what they need to do at the beginning in order to make progression. And I think often when we're starting out on our transition program, and for business, we're all new this year because it's the first year we've been able to do that. You know, it's very difficult at the beginning when you don't really know who your cohort's going to be. You don't really know. So many people have talked about how, as you were saying, Ros, the transition program students are actually quite different from the other level 2 study program students. So it's very difficult at the beginning to kind of set out your requirements beyond the qualification. But that might be an opportunity, again, as part of your review, is so what do we think they need to be able to do? And as Susan was saying, there's no attendance requirement for someone coming straight from school to be able to get onto a T level. There's an inference, isn't there? Well, they must have done homework quite regularly and contributed in classes and done coursework, because otherwise how have they got those grades on the GCSE? So we make inferences from their grades about other things, about their attitude must have been this in order to get grade 5s, or to get that many grade 4s if you're only looking for 4s. So it's about making sure that you're almost, that there's a fairness, there's equity, that you're not looking for something from the students that have been with you for a year that you wouldn't have been looking at elsewhere. So I think part of your review might be to look at, so there's a qualification, then what is it in addition to the qualification that you're looking for in order to be able to get progression? And are you asking for more from your own students that you would have been asking, or actually you're asking for the same thing, but you can infer that from what the students coming from school have got, or you get that from their interview, or you get that from their application form, or you get that from some open days or some summer events that you've been organising. So it's just thinking about the fairness. And no, so Susan, you were talking about potential, you've got pass fail, and that's the other thing, isn't it, that you're not looking for something more from your transition program students. So you're not expecting them to get a merit which is higher than you would expect from someone from school. It's almost as if students that you've had for a year, you should need less of. They should need lower requirements, because as you were saying, it's almost if they can do all of these things, then we're comfortable that they can progress. The qualification's almost an irrelevance. It's the other things that tell us that they're ready to go on to their transition program. So it might be you can now start defining, so that you can say to the students at the outset, as a result of the diagnostic assessment, this is what I would expect you to be able to achieve. So Susan, as you were saying, each student then gets targets. This is what you need to be able to do. You need to make progress against them. And that's part of the kind of T-level with the industry placement, where they need to demonstrate they can make progress. So what you're looking for is, have they made progress? And the monitoring is in order to be able to do that. But the more you can use self-assessment, obviously, that gives them that kind of sense of agency, but also encourages that reflective practice, which is so much important for them as individual learners and successful learners going forward. Okay. Anybody other comments on what students need to achieve before we look at formative assessment? Something? Okay. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah. At AOC, as well as these events, we've started putting together some podcasts where we're talking to various people. Ros, probably one of the things that you're also looking at contributing to when you were saying you were contributing to the podcast. Yeah. Lots of people who have been doing quite innovative things, and some of us are not yet ready to be that innovative, but it's always interesting to hear those people that have taken real strides forward and then thinking, well, what does that mean for me? How far can I go within the organisation that I've got? And as you were saying, think like the constraints that have been set upon me, I can't do that wonderful thing. Therefore, what bit of it can I take that I can incorporate as much as I can? So thanks for putting the link to the podcast there. Formative assessment then. So we're really used to summative assessment because we've got the qualifications and everything is driven around those qualifications. So we're more interested now in terms of the monitoring, because the qualification tends to now be quite small. Some of what you're talking about already has been part of that monitoring, but what kind of formative assessment approaches are you using? So someone talked about choosing a qual that's got exams as well as coursework, like a project. So that prepares them for the exams and the employer set project on the T level. But what kind of formative assessment approaches have people been using? Have you been writing your own exam questions, for example, to use? Have you been writing your own structured projects in the same way as an employer set project? Have you been doing synoptic kind of skills-based, outcomes-based assessments? In a lot of ways, the NTOs are almost like an occupational specialism assessment, a really short snapshot of what they can do. Interested to hear what formative assessment approaches you've been using. Sam, have you got your finger on the board ready? You're lighting up. No.
I can share what I've been doing if you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've written projects based on the outcomes. I took each of the outcomes and then designed a project that the whole class could do based on each one. So the first one, looking at assessing the success of a business, I gave them a range of businesses that they could pick from, and then we took them through how to analyse data. In the finance lessons, we looked at all the data and the analysis techniques and things, looking at company reports. I took them through a lot of the stuff about project management and about how companies use measures to assess their success, and it fitted in really well with the units we were doing on our OCR, because we were talking there about objectives, how you set SMART objectives. So the first project worked very well from that point of view, and literally I did it in a kind of staged approach, so not quite the same as the employer set project. In terms of what they had to work towards was a written report, but they did it in sections, so it was less structured. They all worked together. I gave them elements that they could do each, encouraged them to take on different tasks, set a team leader, and then when they handed in the projects, we Laura, who was here at the time, and we sat and wrote. I went round giving formative assessment as we went along, and then we passed them all. So we sat and we wrote notes about which sections we liked, which we didn't, what was good about them, what they could try in the next section. So the next project I set up, we're looking at the moment, we're still trying to finish it. So we're looking at elements of supermarkets. And we're looking at how supermarkets are dealing with change. So we've done things like SWOTs and PESTLs. So using business models, how can we assess what they're doing? What can they find out about their supermarket? How do they do sales and marketing? What do they do? And they've each got a formal task this time, and they have to do a presentation. I liked what you said about presentations, because I teach verbal, non-verbal communication. They have to do a presentation on that. So last time it was they had to produce a formal report. So we did a lot on report writing and those sorts of skills, and I was able to assess them as part of the project. This time they're working towards a presentation, but the problem has been that quite a few of them, I've got quite a few people who have sporadic attendance, and that's really wrecked the whole team spirit we had going the first time. And it's been very challenging because one of the team leaders has been out for quite a while. So I've found myself more and more, instead of wanting to sit back and watch them use the skills and develop the skills they did in the first one, I've had to almost regress to writing them lists of tasks to do in each project, or they just stop dead and they say, I've done this. So I think the idea, it has been very good that I have seen in some of the project work elements of teamwork and communication skills that I haven't seen in the assessed work. So it has been great for giving individual feedback. I'm not sure I'm quite there yet. My idea was the third project, I would set them a criteria and let them choose their teams and let them decide how to do it, and just less scaffolding. But I really don't think with the learners I've got that is going to work, because there's too many in the class that really should be on a level 2 employability course rather than a T-level transition.
Yeah, I mean, and
So
the key thing about teamwork is that they are learning to be better team workers. So if there's a team leader not there, that's the reality of life. You know, we work on a project as a team, and sometimes for legitimate reasons, the team leader's not available at the time that you want them. So people have to step up.
The challenge is not getting other people to step up, is getting other people to stop doing it all for the people that are missing.
Yeah.
What I found was one of the projects last time, we have a fantastic student who has just unfortunately had to leave us, but she was great, and she literally did almost the whole project for her team. And I said, no, I want the team to fail.
Yeah.
You have to learn in real life. That's what it's like. You know, sometimes you can fill in, but it's individual assessment. So I create it where they have their own notes pages, so I can see what they've contributed.
Yeah.
And the ones that aren't contributing, I can have for it, but I will not fail the whole team.
Yeah.
But, you know, at the end of the day, I am doing formative assessment with the ones that aren't pulling their weight.
Okay. Vanessa, you've got your hand up. Great.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say that with our T-level transition students, that as Ross said earlier, it's all that holistic aspects in terms of assessing them formatively as they go through and making sure that they're working and linking with those NTOs and building that into the qualification, so they don't know where that qualification is other than obviously the end dates for the exams and the synoptic that they've got to work towards. But we've built in, hopefully, and that should be starting after Easter, a project to bring all of that together. So it's not a summative project in terms of they'll get a overall yes, no, whatever, but it's about them bringing together those skills to do something a little bit more practical and a bit more fun. So they're going to hopefully deliver an event that they're going to bring all of those skills and see that actually, yes, they have made progress from the start of that year. Whereas they wouldn't have been able to stand up and present or talk to someone else or create a cash flow or whatever they're going to do in order to help make sure that project is working from start to finish in that aspect. But we have a larger class as well, and that they will be broken down into smaller groups so that they can show those skills, but also showing to them that actually you will all be working together, and in business you are an independent department, you are your independent team, but you will work together, and what you do links in and feeds back to a different department, and without that communication and those skills, those professional behaviors to be able to work together effectively, you're not going to be successful. So it's about building that aspect in, and it links into what we do with our T-level. So our T-level is broken down into projects, so they work together, they work individually. So it's just that cross skill of showing them that you've made progress, you've done well, you're not getting a grade for it or whatever, but actually we can give you some feedback that's going to be really useful so that you can take it on to T-level or apprenticeship or wherever they want to go after the end of this year.
Yeah, thanks for that, Vanessa. The third outcome, the third NTO, a number of providers have talked about how it lends itself well to an event, and the summer term, there's, in theory, when the weather's better, you know, is quite a nice time to have an event. But also where, yes, working in teams, but sometimes partway through the project, moving the teams around, getting them to learn how to fit into a new team, how to welcome people into their team and settle people into their team and bring people up to date with what's going on, and reallocating roles is sometimes quite a useful thing. And that's part of the process, because what they do at the end, the outcome's almost irrelevant. It's the process and what they gain through the process, isn't it? The event doesn't have to be a success. All of the documents that they produce don't have to be amazing. It's what they've learned on their journey. It all sounds very grand, doesn't it? Very educational. But that's really what this is about, isn't it? So it's about looking at having that opportunity to be able to do that. And I think we have some providers, and that's the thing, is that having something synoptic at the end, again, probably mirrors the T-level, where the occupational specialism assessment comes very close to the end. And if they do go on to an apprenticeship, where it's endpoint assessment. So, you know, that notion, but as you were saying, not to give them a kind of summative grade. I think research shows that if you give the students a grade or a mark, they never read they don't read the feedback. And you spend ages writing really good, constructive, formative feedback that supports their development, and all the, oh, I got a merit, great, in the bin, put in the folder, and then don't read the comments, don't give them a grade, don't give them a number, give them the feedback and get them to be able to read it. Go on, Vanessa.
I was just going to say, on top of that, I found that obviously giving them a grade, they don't listen to anything else or read anything else. So one of the things that I found really useful is to sit with them and go through that feedback, but then actually get them to write some comments about it so that they are then fully taking that in, because otherwise it doesn't mean anything to them and they don't make that progress that they need to make. So that's something that has been really useful, is to sit with them individually, but also obviously that higher level group. This is what all of you sort of have issues with, but that individual aspect, and yeah, getting feedback and going back and revisiting that has been really important and really useful to see that development and growth of students.
I think the reflective side and that kind of self-assessment, as Susan was talking about, you know, periodically getting them to review where they are against the targets, but also, as you were saying, Vanessa, getting them to write their own feedback almost. That is going to be so important. And again, if they end up now doing business and they go on to other T levels where the reflective practice aspect is so important, but the employer set project, nearly all of them, has this AO5 review how well the project met the outcomes and their own performance. Students don't know how to do that. That bit of the T level, which is, I mean, it's not worth a lot of marks, but that could be the difference between them getting a B and a C, or an A and a B, or a U and an E. But that opportunity for them to kind of start to think about, well, what are my criteria? What am I reflecting against? You know, I'm reflecting against, if they really are good team workers, they know what makes good teamwork. So do they know what makes good teamwork, that they can then say, I'm a good team worker because I've met this requirement, I can do this, I can do this. This is how I supported this person to be part of the group. This is how I changed what I was doing to enable someone else to do what they needed to be able to do. This is how I contributed. This is how I enabled other people to be able to contribute. So getting them to start thinking about what good looks like and how they are going to use that as part of the reflection means when they're on their T level, they're doing employer set project, they're doing their occupational specialism where they have to be reflective, they're able to look and think, okay, I'm not just starting with a blank sheet of paper. I know there are specific things that I need to focus on. That's a skill, and it's a skill that they need to develop. So having the opportunity to be able to do that's really an important thing. So it sounds like a really good thing to be able to do as part of that. Just as part of the, on the Padlet, one of the resources, again, that we've got is developing an assessment framework, which is all around formative assessment and different aspects of formative assessment within the diagnostic monitoring and guidance. Just point out, these were written, all of these resources were written before the current framework for delivery. So some of the component titles are different. So it used to be just diagnostic and guidance, and now it's diagnostic monitoring and guidance. Excuse me. Different approaches to assessment. Maybe using things like AO5 and using some of the outcomes, the assessment objectives of a T level might be what you want to assess people against formatively as part of their transition program. How good was your planning? How well were you incorporating the technical knowledge and skills? How good were your English, maths and digital skills when they were embedded? How good was your self-reflection, to get them to start thinking in terms of what they would be assessed against as part of the T level? So that links in with that principle of preparing them for the T level. This is a framework that we were given from another provider that you can look at to see how that works, where they've got their whole strategy put together on a spreadsheet that they can use with different kinds of assessment methods that they're using as part of their program. And we've got a template that's available as well that you can use, that you can create for your own, to kind of indicate what your strategy is. So we've got lots of providers that usually about every half term have some kind of formal formative assessment. It's not summative, it's still only formal, but where they say this is the point, you know, so every 6 weeks or maybe every term, something along those lines. So you might find, again, that resource might be useful as a starting point if you don't have anything at the moment as part of your review. So I think for many of you, you're probably finding the more you're delivering the program, the more you're learning about the program, the more you're thinking about what you can do next time. So hopefully these resources and this kind of discussion that we're having and learning from each other but remember, it's that bit about the principle is students know what they need to achieve. So part of the formative assessment, as you were saying, Susan, is that opportunity to reflect on how well they are progressing against their individual targets. The last question then is around demonstrating achievement of the outcomes. So again, there's the outcomes are the learning, but the outcome statements is, if you like, the formative assessment. You know, it's, are they able to do that? There's no standard specified, so nobody's saying it has to be a level 2 outcome, or even for you to have to know what that is. You know, it's just that the student can meet that outcome. So interested student, you've been setting students projects relating to businesses. I know we've got other providers. We've got providers that have businesses on site, so they're able to use those businesses, but others that are going out and meeting employers and bringing employers in. Any of you working with real employers who are coming in as part of the NTOs and the meeting of the outcomes? Have any of you been able to do that? Yes, Sam.
Yeah, we've been working with one actually, and it was something that Ofsted really liked, because they said they rarely see it at transition level. So we've had an employer come in who's got a branding business. So one of our first initial projects where we put them in groups, we've got a sweet shop within college, so we rebranded the sweet shop, and he came in, spoke about his industry, talked about the different roles within industry, and then he actually ran some sessions with them. Started off very easy, got them looking at different texts, colors, styles, got them to create vision boards. But then he's set up kind of a mini project idea that he's had, and he put them within different teams, one looking at marketing, one looking at finance, and so on, which has been really successful, and really built their confidence.
Yeah, brilliant. I mean, it's great, isn't it, if the employer can be engaged all the way through the project, but even if they can only be engaged at the beginning, or at the end, maybe to listen to presentations, or you know, at some point in the middle, maybe to do some mentoring. You know, where are you now? How far have you got? Maybe try doing this. And one of the benefits now that we've all got used to using things like Zoom, it used to be if you wanted the employer, you know, they'd have to travel, they'd have to give up at least half a day to come in for a 1 hour lesson. Now, you know, if you've got you've got 2 hour lesson, or many people have got 3 hours on the timetable, as long as they can slot in, they can usually find the time. And even if it's only for 10 minutes or something within that time, then they can use the online facility to be able to share it with the students. So
we have been really fortunate actually with getting people in, and even we've got a contact from NatWest. She came in for an hour a week over a 5-week period, taught them things like positive mindset, interview skills, ran them with her. We got different employers to come in and interview students. So, yeah, we've really embedded speakers into the business one. I just need to encourage the other pathways to do it now.
Yeah, I know it isn't easy to get the employers, and it isn't easy then to work on the back of what the employers are doing, you know, because for a lot of the students, if an employer comes in and gives a presentation and then says any questions, no, you know, that you've got to do a lot of work with the students in advance for the employer to feel it was worth it and for them to want to come back again. One of the things that I found someone was doing, they often get employers come in to do interviews, like job interviews, that kind of thing. Switched it around. The employer was being interviewed by the student rather than the student being interviewed. And at first I thought, oh. And then I thought about it, I thought, well, actually, what a great opportunity for them to see how somebody professional responds to those questions, because often we put them in those interview sessions and they've never seen what a good response looks like and how people respond to that. And it's also quite good for the employers. They come away going, oh, that was really tough. I forgot what that's like, you know. So there's a lot of benefit there, that they see just how difficult it is when they're then interviewing a 16-year-old. when they're having to think of it from that point of view. And I think this is one of the difficulties with employers. They forget what they were like when they were 16. They have this view that they were just a younger version of themselves as they are now. They kind of forget that young people need to be developed. And so it's a really good opportunity for them to see them. And if they can come in over time, to see how they change over time as well, isn't it? It's a benefit. Any other comments about monitoring, diagnostic, and so on before we move on, because we're coming towards the end and I just want to cover the last couple of things. Okay. Just when you get the slide deck, a couple of things, but just generally, I know, Susan, you were saying really there's not many on your programme. Be useful to know in chat how many you think, what percentage you think are likely to move on to T-levels, and even whether or not you can know at this point. That'd be useful to hear about. And if there are other things that you're going to be included in your programme review, and it may well be that your quality manager sets you the kind of programme review requirements. But if that is the case, then it's worth talking to your advisor if you think that your quality manager is expecting you to comment on things that aren't really appropriate for transition programme, so that they can feed that back to the transition lead or the T-level lead. Because as I say, we're trying to get quality managers to start realising that the transition programme is different, and perhaps the programme review needs to be different as a result of that. Want to point out that the Department for Education has got a consultation at the moment. So one of the things, the main thing they are consulting on, which may or may not be of interest to you, is turning the NTOs into the qualification for the transition programme. So when you get the slide deck, there will be a link. It's going on until around Easter time, I believe, sometime early April. There are a number of questions, but essentially the question is, do you think it's a good idea for the NTOs to be turned into a qualification, which then can form the basis of your transition programme? And that is part of the level 2 and below reforms. And it is one of the categories, which is a level 2 qualification that prepares students for level 3 study. Okay. They don't know yet whether they're going to say you have to do that qualification, or whether you can still do a non-qual approach. Sam, for your approach and just doing the project qualification and so on, they've not made a decision yet about that. And they've also been talking to awarding bodies about that. So really appreciate anybody who can give feedback. We speak to a lot of people who aren't, who say, well, why are they doing this? You know, they shouldn't have done this. And it's like, well, did you contribute to the consultation? No. Well, here's your opportunity. If you like something, you don't like something, then say, because they really are interested in what people have to say about this. Okay. And just to point out, I know I've met some people as we've been on our tour. We have technical focus groups planned for June and July. These are not route specific, unlike this one, and they are for people that are developing and delivering. So it's an opportunity to come together. This is very much around planning much more holistic delivery. So how you bring in English, maths, digital, those core knowledge, skills and behaviours, and make them relevant to the technical content. And as you can see, we haven't got specific venues yet, but we will have Northwest, Northeast, East Midlands, West Midlands, Southeast, Southwest. So the idea is to give you an opportunity to go to somewhere that's not too far. These are face-to-face full day sessions, okay? They're usually 10 till 4:30, although we often finish a little bit earlier, but it's a really good opportunity. There's lots of time, breaks where you can talk to each other, activities where you can talk to each other and learn from each other and come up with something that you can take away. So we've had some recently. Ros, I know you were at the ones we had over in Suffolk, but where route-based project, loads of ideas for route-based project. they're all going on Padlet. So all of the resources that are developed, we keep copies on, we put them on Padlet so they're available for other people to be able to access. So hopefully we get a chance to see you there. But Abby's put the Padlet link in the website, in the chat, so that you can access that. All of the webinars, all of the resources, all of the guidance resources that I've shown you and more are all available on Padlet, and we're building up our frequently asked questions. So if you have got a query, go to your advisor or go to Padlet, because there's a good chance that that's on there. So my colleague Abby's going to put a poll up on the screen as an evaluation, which we'd like you to complete, but also as part of your own planning. If you can think about not having a detailed plan, I'm not going to keep you too late because I want you to be able to do the survey. The 6 questions, I think, 3 questions in the survey, if you could complete the survey. But maybe you want to think about, rather than coming up with a detailed plan of action about how you're going to do your programme review, maybe think about who you go to first. Is there something you need to read? Maybe some of the documents that we've presented. And is there something specific that you need to do that is going to make a difference to being a successful programme review at the end of it? So thanks for those. I think there's one person yet not done the survey, which would be great if you've not done it, if you could do that. Any comments before we finish? Because I know we're a minute over, and I'm sure that's a minute into your lunch break. Anybody got anything, any other comments? Okay, thank you. AQA, in terms of the project qualification, there's AQA, Pearson, City and Guilds, and OCR, I think, all do project qualifications, the formal ones. AQA are the one that have engaged the most with the transition programme, and they've got webinars and they've got resources linked to the transition programme. So even if you don't go with AQA, look at AQA, all of their resources, because I think you'll find that they're the most useful. And then if as a provider you use a different awarding body, at least you've got all the guidance from AQA to be able to work with them. Okay. I'm happy to stay on if people need to speak to me about anything. But other than that, really lovely to see you. Thank you so much for engaging today. And hopefully we get to see you in June and July for real. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Elise. See you later.
Yeah. See
Bye.
you, Rose. Thanks. Bye.